Hello and welcome to our next instalment of the Security Middle East Magazine webinar series. As always, my name is Dan Norman. I'm the moderator for the SME Magazine series, and today I'm joined by Simon Cook, who is a Sales Engineering Director across EMEA at Eagle Eye Networks. Today the topic is something that's very important and something very relevant to the Middle Eastern community, and we're essentially going to be walking through some of the biggest challenges and misconceptions with cybersecurity in the cloud, and really walking through some of the tangible benefits and value of why organizations might want to consider adopting this type of technology. Now, Simon has significant experience in physical security as well as networking and IT. And throughout his career, he specialized in technical solution sales and design. And his industry experience has spanned a ton of different sectors as well. So helping design solutions for banks, airports, police forces, retail, enterprise, and petrochemical as well. So very relevant to some of our listeners on the line. As always, if anyone has any questions, please do add them to the question pane. And at the end of the session, Simon and I will endeavor to ask them and answer them. But I'm really looking forward to this session and learning a bit more about the challenges and misconceptions about cybersecurity in the cloud. So without further ado, Simon, if you can take over from there.
Thanks, Dan, and quite the introduction as well. So thanks for that. No pressure. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dan said, my name is Simon Cook, and I head up the technical pre-sales for Eagle Eye Networks. As part of that, I spend a lot of my time talking to customers, obviously, on the value of cloud surveillance, and certainly in the Middle East, we've seen over the last 6 to 8 months or so a real increase in the interest in cloud technology. It's been a bit slow sort of prior to that, but certainly the last 6 months or so, a real uptake. And when we look at recent shows like Intersec in Saudi the last couple of weeks, we had a lot of interest around the cloud, what we can do and what we can offer. But there is always one question that comes up when we have these discussions, and it's that of how is my data secured, or is my data going to be safe, or how do I know who's got access? So typically it's a question around the sort of cybersecurity aspect, and there's a lot of misconceptions around cybersecurity in terms of how cloud differs from that of on-premise cybersecurity and security platforms. So really want to take the next sort of half hour or so to just go through some of the challenges, some of the differences, and actually how we as a cloud provider overcome it. But first of all, and for anyone that's seen any of my presentations in the past, I like to sort of start with a bit of a view of the landscape. So we look at cybersecurity by the numbers, as I call it. So really, what are we talking about when we talk about cybersecurity? What's the impact? What's the what are the challenges? So some numbers. So the first one, 22 billion. Now that was the number of records that were exposed in data breaches last year. So obviously they're records of all different sizes and shapes. A lot of them are usually shared on the the dark web, or for financial gain, or for purposes of further crime. 15.4 million. This is the number of denial of service attacks worldwide last year. So this, again, quite a significant number. Now we'll talk a little bit about denial of service attacks a bit later on in a couple of slides, and why they're actually relevant to what we do in the cybersecurity space. But if you think about an IP camera, or an NVR or a DVR or a VMS platform that's have access to the internet, that effectively is susceptible. So obviously 15.4 million, quite a significant number. Last couple of weeks, we heard that Uber was attacked by purportedly an 18-year-old boy who decided to just do it for the fun of it. So using some very clever social engineering, he actually managed to infiltrate Uber's network and actually get quite a way through to financial records, to their internal chats, to all different systems through, again, some very basic social engineering. And the $3.7 billion equates to the drop in market valuation that Uber has realized through this attack. And actually Uber in the last couple of years has been the target of a number of attacks, and the last quite significant one they ended up actually paying around about 54 million to try and keep that data breach quiet. So again, quite an impact on them and their business. 95% of all cyber breaches are caused by human error, which is obviously quite significant. And this, obviously it's not deliberate, it's by mistake. And this could be, in our world, in the security world, something quite as simple as forgetting to change the username, default username and password of a camera, or of an NVR, or of a device that has access to the internet. So it's never really deliberate, but it's actually, significant impact on the way that cyber criminals get into systems. 70% of data breaches last year in 2021 were financially motivated. So again, we hear a lot about crimes from different states, et cetera, but it's actually, most of it is really financially motivated. And the financial impact isn't just on the payout or the, the loss of money or data, et cetera. Actually, it can also be the damage to the company reputation. So again, if you're a smaller company, it might be, the end of your business. Someone like Uber obviously is a large company. They lose 3.7 billion. Yeah, they're going to feel it. But, other smaller companies can go out of business. So that, that damage is obviously costing in many different ways. 42% of businesses surveyed suffer from what's called cyber fatigue or apathy to really doing anything about the cyber attacks. This kind of approach of it'll never happen to me, or it'll always happen to someone else, or the security team thinking it's the IT team's problem, or the consultant thinking it's the installer's problem, or all comes into this sort of cyber fatigue or apathy towards actually doing something proactive against protecting your surveillance estate. IoT devices. This year so far, on average, 5,200 attacks against IoT devices. So if you think about, again, a camera, an MVR, DVR, VMS platform, even access control, if we move a little bit further outside video, all of these are IoT devices. So they have, on average, 5,200 attacks per month. So obviously, clearly, something needs to be done. But more staggeringly is this number. So when we talk about something needs to be done, it's reported that if cyber criminals continue to operate at their current rate, by 2025, research indicates that the total global cost of cybercrime is $10.5 trillion US. So obviously a significant amount of money and a significant business for cyber criminals, and obviously the damage and the loss and the costs that that's associated to when it comes to us in the security industry. So when we look at the security, so obviously that's the landscape. But what does this mean when it comes to business challenges? How does it actually impact at the business level? Well, the first challenge that all businesses face, no matter which vertical, no matter where they sit in the world, all of it really is like any virus, whether it's a biological virus for us humans, or whether it's a virus from the IT world. They all continually evolve, right? They are constantly evolving, constantly changing. So obviously for businesses, they always have to stay on top of what the latest virus is, what the latest threat is, and how it could impact them, how they could actually be affected by this virus. I see a lot of disconnect between the IT departments and the security departments. They keep themselves quite disparate. Obviously, the IT side have a far more awareness of what's happening in the sort of cybersecurity landscape, and the physical security just either rely on that or add devices without perhaps thinking about the holistic IT strategy or whatever it is. But ultimately, there is a lot of disconnect between the physical and the cyber security teams. One of the things, of course, is resource and experience. These constantly evolving threats, these constantly emerging challenges, is difficult for people to stay abreast of and to be up to date with and to actually know how to deal with it. So again, a business challenge is having that resource to deal with the next threat or the changing landscape that we see. We see more and more now in the cybersecurity and in the IT landscape, but also security landscape, that constantly evolving compliance legislation. Whether it's something like GDPR, which although more European, actually affects businesses all over the world. All of these sorts of new compliance rules now will be changing to look at how data is secured, and obviously when it comes to handling or misuse or all of these sorts of things. And again, that goes back to that experience and resource. Who manages that? Who's liable for that? We saw through COVID the change in the way that the world is looking to work and starting to work. So, who has access to the systems? When can they access them? And if you're running multiple systems or multiple sites or even multiple countries, it's actually quite difficult to keep on top of who has access to the system and what they do when they're in the system. And again, if we go back to the 95% of human error fact that we looked at in the last slide, or for example the Uber situation, which was the hacker got through a user's account, all of that really starts to become a challenge for a business. How do they keep on top of that management and access of the system? And there's, again, sort of touched on it a little bit already, but that liability. If there is an attack, if there is a breach, if there is a loss of data, financial or personal records, who is liable for that? Is it the owner of the system? Is it the consultant that designed it? Is it the installer that put it in? Is it the manufacturer that created it? This question of liability is coming into play more and more for businesses. And then having, for example, cyber insurance to protect yourselves against this. So all of these coming into the business challenges that the cyber threats are creating. So if we look at security challenges, so obviously the last slide was business challenges. We look at security challenges. Obviously, to stay on top of the threats, there's a constant need for patching and updates. How is that managed? Who does that? When is it done? Obviously, if it's a big system, it needs to be taken down for a period of time. That has an impact on the ability for cameras to do their job if the servers are coming offline to be updated, or if the cameras are coming down to be updated. There's always going to be a window of darkness for that patch to be applied. With that remote access comes the need to actually expose the system. So ultimately, we saw through lockdown the requirements to have access to security platform. That what security is one of those systems that doesn't just get turned off during lockdown. That still needs to be accessed. So what we saw was a lot of remote access requirements going into on-prem systems and obviously to cloud systems. But actually, how is that managed? Do we have to actually expose part of the network or open up firewall ports to actually be able to get to our security footage? How do we actually secure camera communication? Again, tapping into the camera to do a number of different things, whether it's to take control of it for for purposes or for putting in a malware onto it or something like this to actually use as a springboard to get into the network or get somewhere else. How do we actually secure the cameras to make sure that they're not used as a tool? The other thing is, I work with a lot of end users that have hundreds to thousands of cameras. Some of those are outdated cameras, and it's not just outdated firmware, but it's outdated cameras that are no longer manufactured, which means sometimes that the firmware updates have stopped. And cyber criminals actually look for those sorts of products that have been discontinued and have support discontinued, because they can then use the vulnerabilities that are no longer patched to actually use the the access into the network. So again, how do you manage outdated cameras? And again, that user access from anywhere. So going back to exposing the network, how do you manage who's accessing your system, how they're accessing it, getting through the network, what they actually do when they're in the system, what the machine does that they're accessing it from? All of that is a challenge for the security and cybersecurity teams to manage. And then again, the protected footage, not just as it's going across the network or the internet, but also when it's at rest, when it's actually wherever it's stored. How is that footage protected? How is it encrypted? What happens if it can be accessed? So all of that part of the security challenges. Now, again, going back to the question that I get quite a lot is around cybersecurity when it comes to the cloud. My data's insecure, someone can access it, etc., etc. But all of these challenges that I've spoken about, business and security, are both relevant to on-premise systems that we have today, but also cloud platforms that we talk about moving forwards. So talk a lot about attacks, talked a lot about some of the challenges that the business face. But what actually are some of the most common attacks when it comes to security platform? Well, the first one is malware. So again, when we talk about those unprotected cameras or those unpatched cameras or servers or NVRs or DVRs, the ability to actually put a little applet that runs on the camera or device to either take control of that camera or to use it for another purpose. And again, we'll talk about denial of service attacks a bit later on that also use malware to turn a device against another device, but actually installing something on the camera that shouldn't be there. Denial of service attack. So we've used this term already, and really denial of service is just usually inundating a device or set of devices until they effectively fall over for whatever reason. So whether that's to access for legitimate users, or whether that's to mask something from happening so that criminals can come in and take something over physically while the cameras are offline because they've just been constantly hit and fallen over. All of these different possibilities with a denial of service attack. A brute force attack is basically someone trying to continually try varying usernames and passwords or combinations of username and password to actually access a device or devices. So they'll just set a program that continually runs trying all different combinations until it actually gets success and then gets into the camera or MVR or DVR. And finally, man-in-the-middle attack. So this is effectively hijacking a stream between two devices and pretending to be the end device and changing the communication or changing the stream in some way or intercepting the information going from point A to point B. So again, we talk a lot about cybersecurity, but when I talk to customers or when I talk to consultants or integrators or anything like that, they understand the concept of cybersecurity, but sometimes it's not always evident what the challenges actually are. So I just wanted to take a look at some of these challenges so that you're aware of what we're talking about when we talk about cyber threats. And actually, if we go back to the Mirai attack a couple of years ago, when I talk about denial of service and malware, one of the biggest proponents of the Mirai attack was actually IP cameras. So again, they were actually used, they were running malware, and they were used as denial of service devices, so bots effectively, to actually push those denial of services to Twitter and Facebook and eBay and all of the companies that were attacked by the Mirai botnet issue of a couple of years. It was predominantly a large number of MVRs and CCTV cameras, IP cameras, that were used against those companies as bots for constantly hammering their servers. So again, when we talk about what's the threat, what does it mean? It's not always necessarily about people trying to access my system and trying to get into my network, but actually using my system against another third party. So this is a busy slide, so apologies for that. But ultimately, what I want to do now is start looking into how we deal with some of these challenges. So again, we talk a lot about the cyber risks, the cyber threats. None of what I've said so far is really specific to cloud. And ultimately, I build that up to say that actually there is this misconception that cloud is insecure or is any way different or faces different challenges. There are some differences, obviously, but again, everything that I've spoken about already is specific to both on-prem and solutions in the cloud. But how do we as Eagle Eye Networks address the common threats? So from a malware perspective, what we effectively do, Eagle Eye Networks utilize a bridge device. So it's effectively a gateway that connects the cameras on the internal network side to our cloud platform. And what this box does ultimately is a number of things: bandwidth management, analytics, intelligence. But one of the key things it does is add that element of cybersecurity into the solution. So we effectively have a camera network on one side of the box and then the internet on the other side of the box. And between those two sides, there is effectively a firewall and a virtual network. So everything on your camera network is completely invisible to the internet. So there's no way that anyone from the internet can actually get to those cameras to either use them as to try and get onto them, install malware, anything like that. The cameras are completely isolated from the internet, even though they're talking to the internet. Denial of service, well, for that we actually only communicate outbound. So again, the cameras are invisible to the internet, so that there's no ability to actually get to them to hammer them. But second to that, we only use outbound communication. So there's no way that the cameras or the bridges can be used in a denial of service attack. When it comes to brute force, we actually have in the application the ability to log in a certain number of times, so let's say you set the login for 5 times, it's feasible that a user, much like me, I always forget my passwords, you have 5 attempts and then it locks you out for a period of time. But actually what we can do is lock that user out indefinitely. So they have so many times they can use their password. After that, it doesn't allow them any access. So again, if you look at that in a brute force attack way, as I've said, it's continually trying varying variations of a username and password. That will actually see that as illegal activity and then just block it. So it will stop it dead. And then we come on to the man-in-the-middle attack. And this is something that is incredibly difficult to achieve. You should never say never in the cybersecurity world, but it's certainly very, very difficult to achieve because we use AES encryption, we use TLS encryption, and actually we use certificates to make sure that from end to end, so from the camera all the way through to the browser or to the mobile device application, there are layers of encryption and certificates to ensure that there is constant, clear and secure communication between those devices and no ability to inject a man-in-the-middle attack into that video stream or that communication stream. So again, a number of different ways to actually protect your system, all cloud-based, all of the levels of security encryption. And one of the questions I often ask when I talk to customers around that sort of feeling of security in the cloud, most people these days do all of their banking, all their financial transactions online. You have an app or a number of apps depending on your banking, credit card, stock, shares, etc., etc. But all your financial transactions are done via the cloud. All of the technology that we incorporate into our solution uses almost identically the same levels of security. So again, that trust of using your money in the cloud should be going into the same thing, to the same approach, same mindset of our surveillance platform. So when we look at the different types of applications, if we look at the DVR and MVR, so DVRs and MVRs specifically have to open up a lot of firewall ports to enable communication with the boxes and devices. So they're inherent for coming into sort of threats and attacks. They can have applets running on them. They can have denial of service. They have ultimately a number of different attacks. And hackers really like to use these as the entry point into the network. Number of instances I've seen, unfortunately, working with end users that have moved away from these boxes because they were entry points and very easy entry points into a network. So very, very insecure when it comes to cybersecurity. And ultimately, as it says there, when a DVR or MVR is compromised, it's got to be replaced. It's as simple as that. It's obviously quite a significant cost in time and investment when it comes to a box that's been attacked. When it comes to Windows, well, Windows, obviously, we all know how often that has to be patched, that has to be updated. So when you have a VMS platform that is running Windows, there are a number of challenges when you have to either schedule that, whether it has to be the whole system that comes down, or whether you have to invest in failover so that you can actually update various parts of the system and take them up and down, and then obviously have a failover mechanism in place so the cameras continue record. So there's a lot of time, planning and effort and cost that goes into updating a Windows-based machine. And obviously Windows is continually being targeted because it is quite easy to focus on and to write write applications directed at Windows because it is so prevalent. And then obviously that has that kind of impact when we talk about resource. Someone has to manage that. Someone has to understand what's constantly happening. Someone has to prepare and patch and thwart attacks and continually keep that updated. So that obviously takes a lot of resource and a lot of time. And then when we come to cloud, so cloud platform removes a lot of those blocks for customers. So again, as I mentioned on the last slide, a number of different ways that we protect the 4 key attacks that a customer would see. We block cameras communicated with the internet. It's as simple as that. If the camera can't have an inbound connection, it can't have malware, it can't have denial of service. So we're automatically removing that threat from your solution. Ultimately, with the platform that we use, it blocks any pre-installed Trojan. So once again, we're not opening ourselves up because that's one-way communication outbound, where all the certificates that we use, all of these security mechanisms in place to actually make lives a lot easier for our customers, for their resources, for their management, for their planning. And again, if you think about a cloud update, when we update our solution in the cloud, it's layered in multiple servers, it's layered across multiple physical and geo-redundant locations. So it allows us actually to really reduce the patching issue for the customer. So key differences then for us. We're a self-hosted cloud platform, meaning that we don't have to wait for those windows of upgrade that Microsoft Azure or Google or Amazon Web Services allow manufacturers. So we can actually deploy our updates or patches as when we decide, as opposed to those upgrade windows that the other manufacturers offer. We're purpose built from the ground up to be cyber secure. So cybersecurity for us isn't an afterthought. It's actually purpose built into our system. And we do all the pen testing and all the rest of it that you often have questions around. We have the ISO 27001 and SOC 2 compliance. So again, trying to do everything that we can to build in that comfort that ultimately a cloud platform would give you, that sort of mitigation of threat when it comes to cybersecurity. We're an open platform, so we can actually integrate into many other third-party applications. So, if you're using a monitoring system, or if you're using, a network monitoring system, we can integrate to that to provide information into that as well. So you have a holistic view of your entire estate. Camera flexibility, well, that goes without saying, but we have thousands and thousands of supported devices in our device list, both obviously, as I said, current cameras and outdated cameras. But again, that security that we provide from the bridge level, ensuring that whichever cameras you use, they're protected from the internet. Cybersecurity in our DNA. And what we mean by that is our founder and CEO actually started up Barracuda Networks. So from those from the IT space, you may know the name Barracuda Networks because they are so prevalent when it comes to cybersecurity in the IT space. So again, that's in our DNA. And then global partner ecosystem. So deploying our system to customers through our global partner ecosystem. And that allows us to ensure, when it comes to that liability that I talked about earlier, that we're working with the right installers, that they are going to set the system up correctly and securely, that we're working with the right consultants, that they're going to design the system from the outset, as it should be and secure as it can be for the customer. So I've said a lot in the last half an hour. There's a lot to talk about. I see lots of questions coming in, which is good. But ultimately, there's three things I want you to take away from this session. The first is that cyber challenges aren't specific to cloud. Okay, they affect the same cybersecurity challenges affect both on-prem and cloud networks. And I hear a lot about ring fencing or keeping your system offline or out of the internet. That's all well and good, but every customer that I've worked with, or almost every customer I've ever worked with, end user, that's faced that approach at some point has to bring their VMS or surveillance platform onto the internet. And the minute they do, they are usually the most compromised because they don't have the history and protection that an online system would have done. So it's easy to say, well, I'll keep it offline and it won't affect me. But again, if I use the banking analogy, how often these days do you just keep your money, under your mattress or, in a piggy bank at home? You don't. It's all in a bank. It's all locked away and secured in the cloud. Cloud solutions, whether it's Eagle Eye Networks or another, can always evolve quicker to threats than an on-prem platform, because the way that we manage the patching, the way that we manage the threat management, all of these different types of applications can always actively or respond quicker than an on-prem platform. We don't have to have that same patching window. We don't have to work out who's going to do it. We don't have to work out what it's going to impact. We can actually handle that a lot quicker. So if there is a threat identified, and again, if we look at the 10.5 trillion and the constant evolution of the cybersecurity landscape, we can actually see how important it is to quickly react to a threat. And finally, Eagle Eye Networks obviously wants to offer this to our customers. It is in our DNA. It's designed from the ground up to be the best protection that we can offer to our customers. And obviously, with all of the legal and compliance stuff that we're doing with ISO and SOC and all of this kind of stuff, it continually evolves to make sure that we give our customers that kind of leading edge, cutting edge protection, to ensure that when you move your data from an on-premise system into the cloud, it does ensure that your data, whether it's obviously stored footage or whether it's footage in the in transit, whether it's connecting to the system, it's making sure that Eagle Eye Networks has the technology to ensure that you have that highest level of trust in your surveillance platform. So with that, I'm going to switch back. Dan, I'm going to bring the conversation. Thank you all for your time. Hope it was useful to, well, to all of you, but at least some of you. Dan.
Thanks, Simon. And yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. The kind of one word that I think I'd like to focus on that you mentioned at the very end was trust. And you and I spoke offline about cloud solutions, especially in the Middle Eastern market, and maybe the lack of education around the benefits, really. And I'm walking through some of the questions here. We've got a lot to get through. And they're all really about the solution. So what is the sort of key benefits, the value of Eagle Eye Networks? So one of the first questions here is around how does this actual solution work, really, in terms of, can you operate from a portal to control everything? What is the degree of control that the end user will have? Would you mind just sort of elaborating on how the Eagle Eye Networks solution might work in practice?
That's a great question. And again, it's one I get very often. And the simple answer is yes. Everything that we have is through a portal. So, you know, the end user would sign up for the platform, and know whether they've got one of those bridges that I talked about, whether they've got 100 of those bridges, whether they've got one site or they've got 100 sites, everything is managed through one window for them. So all of their devices, all of their users, all of their layouts, all of their analytics, everything is through one you know, one pane of glass, so to speak. So yeah, great question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. It's just one application. Yeah,
and one of the other, I mean, there's two questions that are pretty similar, and it's around how easily can Eagle Eye be integrated with other systems such as access control or facial recognition, and how scalable are these types of solutions?
So another great question. And again, this is something that we do a lot. Obviously, video for the longest time was a standalone platform, but these days it's very common to be integrated into a number of different third-party platforms. And because of that, we've created an API approach. So basically, we have an open REST-based API, which means that we can be integrated into any number of different types of applications, whether it's security focused, like, you know, access control or analytics or anything like that, but actually, you know, more and more into more business-based applications. You know, building management, smart buildings is a very common platform, you know, smart building management systems. So the answer is yes. And the even better thing about that is the API is free to use. So we don't charge for our API. It can be integrated cost-free.
Yeah, fantastic. And just building on that first question around trust, I think, I mean, I can probably speak for a lot of security professionals in saying that cybersecurity certifications they do go a long way in providing that degree of trust in a solution. Yeah. And you mentioned that Eagle Eye kind of follow the highest degree of certifications. What types of certifications does Eagle Eye have?
So I think the most common that we're asked for whenever we're looking at new opportunity is the SOC 2 and the ISO 27001. This really goes a long way to showing how we secure our systems, how we handle the customer's data. You know, obviously there is always news of you know, manufacturers mishandling video footage and sensitive data. Those are probably the two biggest that tick most boxes, and you know, we continually check and monitor our processes to make sure we're adhering to those. And I know that there are different ones in different regions. You know, we're currently looking at how we can address the various different ones in the Middle East. But certainly, yeah, SOC 2, ISO 27001 are probably the most common requests that I get, and those ones we do have we have both of those. And obviously, as I mentioned, you know, one of the other things we get asked quite a lot is penetration testing. How do we manage that? So I think the last time I checked in, we were doing weekly penetration testing to ensure that we stay, you know, on top of all of this.
Fantastic. And just referring back to that slide that you had, where it sort of explained the internal, external traffic with the Eagle Eye Network solution.
Yeah.
You mentioned from the outset malware, DDoS, brute force, man-in-the-middle attacks, just getting worse and worse. Would you mind just reiterating how Eagle Eye adds that additional layer of security to protect against these threats?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bridge device I mentioned, I mean, ultimately, the key really is everything that does is outbound communication. So there's no inbound requirements. You're not actually having to open up firewall ports. You're not having to expose parts of your network. So that is really key, because again, when you look at VMS platforms or you look at NVRs, you often have to expose firewall ports, which are usually scanned by attackers and then infiltrated. The other thing as well, which is also key, is keeping those cameras completely separate so they are invisible to the network. So again, running a malware application on the camera is impossible. Being able to brute force, denial of service attack the camera is impossible. So when you're looking at a cloud provider, or indeed any provider, ask how they actually protect the internal side from the external side, because to my knowledge, very few of our competitors actually do it in the same secure way.
Fantastic. So I've got a couple of questions here around sort of costs and things like that, but I'm sure that if any of the individuals are interested, they can reach out to you directly or get in contact that way. I've got a question here around from Michael saying that he couldn't be at the Intersec Saudi Arabia, but are there any other events that Eagle Eye Networks are going to be attending where they're going to be sort of promoting or showing these tools in person?
So I would have to check with my colleagues in Dubai which events we've got to the end of this year. I know myself, I will be in Intersec in Dubai in January. So of course, if anyone wants to swing by our booth at Intersec in January in Dubai, by all means, please feel free to come and see me. That's the one that I will be at personally. But we can certainly, I'll take that question and find our marketing team and to make sure we get a response to that.
Okay, thank you. And there's one question here around the, I guess the service itself. And one of the individuals here said, essentially, how long do you have to commit for Eagle Eye? Is it? Would you mind just elaborating on the actual design of the service? Is it a per camera? Is it? Yeah, if you could just elaborate a little bit, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, so that's a great question. So from a committal perspective, obviously we want customers to commit for as long as they need, but ultimately that's the great thing, is you can just commit for as long as you need as an end user. So a lot of the things that we do, it's a subscription-based service, right? So much like Netflix, Spotify, these types of services, you have it for as long as you need it. So ultimately you pay a monthly subscription, and it's by camera, and ultimately use the service for as long as you need. So one of the ways that we can actually scale, which I didn't really mention actually, is we have this ability to sit alongside an existing platform. So we can do something called replication. So you might have a VMS or an NVR already existing on site. We can actually sit alongside that. We put the bridge device in place. We take a stream from the camera. Most cameras support multiple streams. And we can actually start recording your footage to the cloud aside from your on-premise platform. Again, you can pay for that. Maybe you just want to have some off-site retention for a small period of time. Maybe you want to use that as a migration strategy to a cloud platform. But ultimately, again, all down to you pay for it when you need it, when you want it. So think of it as a Netflix, Spotify. You can cancel that subscription at any time with no penalty. We go exactly the same way.
Okay, thank you.
So to go back to where are we, my message box has just blown up a little bit here. So just to answer that question, so we're at Aziz in the Middle East, 14th to the 17th of November. We are in Cairo, 27th to the 30th of November. So there's 2 events in November that you can come catch us at.
Great, ample opportunity to explore the Eagle Eye Network solutions there. Now, I mean, we've been in quite a degree of detail about the solution itself, but I definitely recommend exploring the website and reaching out offline. There's a lot of additional value and benefits that you just wouldn't be able to see over this type of webinar. And we're almost out of time, Simon. So one of the questions that I really do like asking the individuals presenting really is more of an education piece here. So we know that the amount of cyber attacks are increasing rapidly. There's a lot of kind of fear mongering, but it is steeped in facts. But to summarize, what are some of the quick wins that you would suggest that everybody can incorporate into their day-to-day life to stay safe?
So it's a very, very good question. I think that the biggest thing is just be aware of that cybersecurity apathy that I talked about in the slide there. 42% of businesses surveyed admit to having that apathy. That kind of "it will never happen to me" approach, everyone thinks that until it happens to them, and that's life, right? We always go, "that will never happen to me." Really, it's just taking it seriously, realizing that actually, if you're a business of any size, you are potentially at risk. If you have, any number of IoT devices, be it cameras, NVRs, DVRs, VMS, anything, you are at risk. I think, the questions I would ask, or have you ask your provider, is, how are you securing my data when it's when it's going outside of my network? How am I protected? What happens if my system is attacked? How quickly can you respond? Aside from that, it's making sure that you have things like multi-factor authentication when it comes to access of the network, keeping your cameras patched, and for the love of God, and this is really scary how often I see this, please ensure that you change your root username and password. That's probably one of the biggest and simplest things. And it's something I see so regularly. I mean, there's websites you can go to that will give you lists of all of the cameras that it can see that haven't changed their username and password. So, it just, in the simplest thing, just ensure that you're not running admin password or admin or whatever it is. Just make sure that at the very basic has changed. And I would suggest using special characters. So again, not just, password 12345, but actually, ampersand, the exclamation mark, question marks, hashtags. Use it as complex as you can, because obviously, as you're prompted of all of your personal, your banking, your Facebook account, all recommend using that difficult to guess password. Your IT cameras, no different. So just ensure that you're not using the standard root and pass and those sorts of things. Yeah,
definitely, absolutely. I mean, basic security hygiene is
basic security hygiene. And again, that apathy. Just be aware of it. Make sure you understand as your business who is taking ownership of it, and make sure if you're talking to your partner, whether it's your installer or your manufacturer, making sure they understand and you understand who is responsible for what and how it's going to be managed.
Yeah. And just one more question, Simon, that's just come in, and I've been asked this personally in my day-to-day job, especially in Saudi Arabia. And the question is, how do you manage the sort of compliance links to local cloud requirements? And I mean, a good example there might be for Saudi-based organizations, they're not necessarily allowed to host data in cloud solutions that aren't based in the kingdom. So how do your solutions get around that particular compliance problem?
So one of the things that we're doing is looking at rolling out more and more data centers in the Middle East, because obviously we know that data sovereignty for a number of countries in the Middle East is, obviously a very common challenge. The great thing about our solution is that, as I mentioned, we have our own data centers or our own data center spaces. We're not reliant on the third parties, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, to set up data centers in those countries or regions. We don't have to wait for them. So ultimately, if the opportunity presents itself or the requirement presents itself where we have to have a data center in a country where we don't have one, we will look to rolling it out, because we understand data sovereignty, we understand compliance, and these are all key important things for us to work with our customers to ensure we cover.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Simon, thank you so much for your time and your presentation today. There's been a ton of questions, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people reaching out to you either directly or exploring the Eagle Eye Network's website. But I'd just like to thank everyone on the line as well for attending. This presentation has been recorded and you'll be seeing it filtered out on LinkedIn and other platforms as well. But Simon, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
and thank you everyone for attending.